What's up, Change the Channel podcast listeners? My name is Megan Grace, and this is another episode of Change the Channel podcast. Welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I am going to unpack kind of a corner of a topic that I love to talk about, mostly because it's been a big area of channel changing in my life. And so as I've talked to other people, I've noticed that this is also kind of a topic that has been somewhat taboo. And after last week's episode talking all about hormones and changing seasons and transitions of time, it got me thinking that Change the Channel can be a beautiful place to unpack some of these channels that we have, stories that we have about, some of these deeper topics. And so on today's episode, I want to share a little bit about some things I learned about sex for me. And I will tell you, I love talking about sex. I would just do. I find it fascinating. I find it intimate and interesting and playful and curious. And for me, it has not always been that way. And that's the channel that I wanted to highlight and bring to the forefront, because in my journey of reclamation of myself and my body and my access to pleasure and joy and creativity, I learned about some incredible resources and just some wild ways of thinking. And I think it's also important to understand why it's important to change the channel, because so many of these channels that we have in our bodies or in our minds, it feels like it's just in your mind, it actually can impact your body. And so this particular channel, the one about sex, had a pretty negative impact on me early on, and I felt really alone in it. And especially after the last episode talking about hormones and transitioning between ages, there's a lot of vulnerability that is just simply, the aging process and being a human being in a body that we don't talk about. And so because I got so much feedback that people were just really grateful that I was starting these conversations, we're just going to keep that good rolling. And we're going to talk about a facet of sex today. So I will give you a bit of the backstory of where this channel came for me. All puns intended. It came from this very devout religious background. There was this, common sort of narrative that purity was the highest thing to be. I don't think I ever heard anything about pleasure until after I had some really traumatic things happen, and I had gone to therapy and we started talking about it. And I don't think that therapy needs to be the place that we start talking about female pleasure. Can it please be in other places? And so I had internalized this channel, that there was something, there was something wrong about my body. I remember one of my kind of female mentor-y type mother figures being just as long as you can make sex seem like it's available to your partner, almost like chocolate cake on a counter, then sooner or later he'll get a stomach ache and he'll kind of leave you alone. And I was like, why the hell is this the message? Looking back on it now, I'm like, Like, yes, baby, I want to be chocolate cake, but not in a way that like, okay, you'll survive somebody wanting and desiring you. Like, I want to be decadent and delicious and supple and something that people see on a counter and are like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And I think there are a lot of women that feel that way. I also, with that, there's this weird narrative, and where I'm going to go off on a PhD in my own opinion, but I feel like so many issues around, especially hetero sex, is like this narrative that men are just chomping at the bit every second of every day, like, desiring sex. And then women are like, oh, aghast, not me. Don't come over here, that kind of thing. Like, I have a headache, rolling over, this, that, whatever. And what I actually think in a lot of ways is women are on sort of this 28-day cycle, right? So every day I wake up, I reintroduce myself to myself in the mirror and I say, hi, like, who are you today? What are you like, what do you need? How much like capacity do you have to human today? Are you, are you feeling yourself, or do you need a little pick me up? Some days I feel like I can like essentially plan out like an entire empire, and the next day I don't want to leave my room or see another soul. And those could be 2 days right after each other, and it feels kind of like chasing an elusive tumbleweed about what my energy is. And that can also play into sex. I mean, I think that like maybe it's not that women don't desire sex. Maybe it's that they desire a different texture or a different flavor or experience. Like, sometimes you want more pressure, more sensation. Other times you want something that's a little bit more chill. But what if the narrative stopped being men always want sex and women just don't care about sex? And what if it started to be the idea, because I hear this from a lot of my friends, especially a lot of my married friends, that like they desire their partner. They want their partner to desire them as well. And a lot of times it's like, especially their male partners seem to be overwhelmed or shut down, or and it's like there's this physical pressure, and that can show up as, different types of erectile issues, or, a lack of desire, or a lot of stress. And I just wonder, as this aside, what if we started or lived with the channel that like a woman is kind of this drumbeat in a dynamic, or if you're in like a same-sex partnership, that's like the divine feminine. So I believe that each person holds both the masculine and the feminine energies. And so it's kind of this interchange and play with like who is feeling kind of the swells and ups and downs and movement, and who is keeping more of a steady drumbeat. But in, a dynamic that's like a heterodynamic one, because I can speak to that more because that's kind of the lane that I play the most in. Like, I feel like there is this invitation to become curious about what the feminine is saying that day. How does the feminine want to be acknowledged, or like touched or played with or pleasured? Like, and what if that became more of like a game and a quandary? Because if, I don't know, I don't want to speak for all women, but I can speak for myself and say that if I'm as somewhat bewildered by myself every day when I wake up, even with a pretty sure sense of self, like it's kind of a journey for me to learn about me. And any partner I'm with, it's a journey for them to learn about me too. And it's a journey for me to learn about them. So what if we could take some of the pressure of the man, or the masculine person that's in the dynamic, or the one that's holding the divine masculine? what if instead of us assuming that like they're just always wanting something, what if the attention shifted to where is the divine feminine in the relationship, directing, leading, enticing? Because then you get to have like a full flavor, like smorgasbord of a variety of connections, intimately with your partner. So that's something that's been sort of culminating in my mind, and like I get a bit irritated about when I hear the way that we sort of have simplified and essentially written out female pleasure out of the equation at all. And then I think we can also pendulum swing where it's like, I don't need anybody. I can take care of myself. I can get whatever toys I need. And some of that is awesome. But I know for myself, when I go through long periods of time where that's kind of my mode, it starts to feel harder to connect sometimes with a partner when I am with them. I start to feel a little bit more insecure, or I'm like, oh, I don't like, or out of practice, I guess. So just that quick side of like the pendulum swinging, or the, being in a space of absolutism, around things like sex that are meant to be dynamic and juicy and an experience. So the other part, and kind of how I'd started the podcast talking about growing up in a pretty sexually repressed, like family, and the ways that we talked about sex were just, well, actually, I shouldn't even say that, because I don't think we really even did talk about it. I like inadvertently, the channel that had been connecting my mind to my my hips, my pelvic floor, my pelvic bowl area, it started to make a disconnect between those two. And when I ended up getting married and being in a longer term committed relationship, this channel became really, really problematic and painful and hard for me. So basically, I learned that there are several different types of conditions and things that can happen to a to someone with like female genitalia at birth. And this all comes from kind of a lens of the channel you listen to, and also your anatomy, and also desire, which is fascinating. So bear with me as I geek out on this from a bodywork lens. So the stories that have been told to me, the channels that have been told to me are like, resist, resist, resist. And then it was all of a sudden like, you're married, go, go, go. Well, this entire time, the muscle structure that was part of my pelvic floor, these are muscles like your piriformis, your obturator, some other tinier muscles. Those two stand out because my PT and I have had many conversations about those particular muscles. But they go from like your hip, and they come in and connect to like your internal pubis muscle. And it's fascinating because what happens when a channel of resist starts to play, the muscles start to obey. And so the muscles start to tighten and tighten and tighten. And when muscles in those areas become really tight, they become less supple, juicy, and are like, it's essentially like hitting your bicep that's like consistently curled. So I was having these sensations, and I'm going to share about this a little bit more openly because my journey to healing this has been so profound. And I just realized how many women are walking around in pain, feeling shame, feeling alone, feeling confused, and or just being like, maybe it's just sex isn't for me. And as someone that's come from that, like that being part of my background, I want to offer some hope because it can feel really lonely. This falls very much in my line of work. If you're local, doing, body work around like, the hips and the conversation and the narratives that are run about intimacy can be really, really profound and powerful. Using Reiki or energy work, playfulness, moving the shame out of the body, can move the shame I've noticed and felt from clients away from the muscles. I've had clients that have had, traumatic things or potentially traumatic things, almost the threat of traumatic things happening in their past, and it's caused their hips to lock up. And it's almost like we need to tell those muscles that whatever that is, that threat is not coming back. And so you can move away from being on guard and allow yourself to sigh into relaxation. And that is like, it's amazing. It starts to shift things so profoundly. And even the conversations about where did you learn about sex? Where did you learn about pleasure? Where did you learn about it, cognitively, but like also where did you learn about it like in embodied action? Tracing back some of those roots can be so profoundly powerful and important. And then, so anyway, fast forward in my own story, I got married and I was, learning. I got married very young, and was learning about my body basically, for the first time, because no one had really told me anything about it. And I was in so much pain. Intimacy, in any right in any way, like just, it would cause really interesting sensations. Like being touched in my more intimate spaces would feel like bee stings, or, one time it felt like I was like, sitting on an anthill. One time I was walking through the grocery store and it felt like there was a knife that had like stabbed up inside of me. Actually almost like doubled me over. It was so painful. And, as you can imagine, it caused a lot of conflict, with me and my partner, because here we were like, newly together. And I even had like a crazy army doctor try to tell me that maybe my anatomy just wasn't designed for a penetration, which is terrible medical advice. But that just to say that a lot of times the medical advice for women and women's health is not a high priority, and therefore is not always well educated. And we a lot of times just kind of assume that like female pleasure is more of like a bonus and not like, the important, not an important factor and piece and part. So anyway, I had all of this jargon and the stories and channels started going in my head that like there was something wrong with me, that I was broken, that I was a extreme disappointment, that I was, not worth loving, that, so much that's tied to like, our ability to be desired. And I just felt so shut down. And finally I went to a doctor, and it was so wild. Like we were in this podunk town in Enterprise, Alabama, which, if you're listening and you're in Alabama, my personal opinion is I'm very sorry. Like, get out of there as soon as you can. Those were 2 years of my life, I feel, where it wasn't even really the best of times. It was just kind of the worst of times. But I was grateful for this doctor that was like, we need to get you a referral because the sensations you're having and how much it's impacting even your daily life, even when I wasn't in intimate situations, just even when I was in stress, like, or nervous or anything, like I would feel these really, really painful sensations. And so I drove 6 hours to a less podunk town in Alabama. And I remember walking down this hallway of this like really dingy old, like there was like kind of those flickering fluorescent light bulbs. And I was just like, this is literally where I either go to solve my biggest riddle or where I go to die. Like it kind of had a little bit of that crime scene-y, essence. And anyway, so I got into the doctor's office and they, started the exam with a little cotton swab and asked what areas, around my intimate, space, within literally 2 minutes, this person's like, "Oh, I know what it is." I was like, what is like, y'all, I drove 6 hours for this. So I'm thinking, give me the deluxe, look, explore, tell me all the things. Let's be besties. Like I've always been really curious. It's another aside when you go to the doctor, ask them questions. Like, don't just assume they'll tell you things. Ask them what you want to know. That's another thing that I love to help people with. If you're, trying to come up with what to ask your medical provider, we can totally do a consult on that. So you can go in feeling really armed and ready to talk. So I learned a ton through just this pelvic floor journey about how to advocate for myself and learn. And sometimes I was even almost teaching the practitioners that I was around how to help me take care of myself. So anyway, I was diagnosed with vulvodynia. And I bring this up because vulvodynia and vaginismus are actually pretty common different neurophysiological conditions that affect people with vulvas. And if you are having any of the symptoms that I'm describing, or maybe you have a friend that's, talked about this or whatever, please send her this podcast, because this stuff needs to be talked about. And there's help for you. Like, this is not a condition for forever. It's a condition that sometimes flares up for me, but I know what to do about it. So anyway, fast forward back to the dingy hallway doctor visit. I get this diagnosis and I am driving back through the country wilds of Alabama and my head is swirling. Like, what does this mean? What is wrong with me? How do I fix it? I started Googling it, and it wasn't actually until I moved to Alaska that I found there was like a pain clinic. And I went and found that there were pelvic floor physical therapists that like literally will help your brain and your body reconnect the synapses, because pretty much what happens and why I find it so fascinating with the changing the channel is the channel that had become a part of my body to experience is that when I am touched, it hurts. When I'm touched, it's bad. And basically what the physical therapist would do was go in and find the origin. There's like an insertion point of your muscles and a place where the insertion, that's what it was, the beginning and the end kind of point of the muscle. And basically what they do is they provide pressure and find, just like with any other muscle that that you can go to a massage therapist to get work on, these pelvic floor PTs are doing the freaking goddess work out there of tracking down and finding those painful, trigger point, or extremely tight muscles. And basically what happened is my brain would register sensation, and it would spit out the, kind of send back to the muscle, or like the nerves, basically, ouch. And it would cross wire them so much that it wasn't just a regular ouch. That's why I was like, oh, it feels like bee stings, or it feels like itching, or it feels like sandpaper. It felt like weirdly weird and obscure sensations. And what was so cool is as I went to therapy, I went to this physical therapist like 3 times a week for it took me a couple years. I had like muscle injections in in those places. That was so painful. But it was because the muscles were so tight that basically whenever they would ask me to relax, the muscle would tighten even further. This was because I was just trying to work on the situation from a physical standpoint. I was just like, breathe, feel, head, brain, let's go. I was not including anything about the spiritual side of it. And I was not talking about the narratives that had the muscles that tight to begin with. That's why the work that I do is so important to me, because I realized like that we need a whole person assessment and care, because if you take out that piece of why the muscles are that tight, what are they doing to help protect my body? They were being exactly what they needed to be to help me keep the channel going, that like I'm to resist this type of touch, this type of connection. And they're like, you know what? I'm going to even make it easier for you. I'm going to give you 1,000,001 reasons to not connect. So then, you won't have to feel guilt or shame or anything. Like, don't worry, girl, we got you. So that's why somatic and narrative coaching is so important, because it helps the muscles tell the story and rewrite that story, and on like a spiritual and like embodied level. The physical level is great with physical therapists, where, they apply pressure, and then I would breathe, and they would say, okay, like, and I was like, oh, that feels like so much pressure. And they would put their finger on like my inner thigh and be like, this is how much pressure we're using. And then my brain would just go, whoa, well, that's not very much pressure at all. What would it be like to breathe? What would it be like to, exhale out through this? Like, it was a intimate and cosmic unwinding. And it wasn't really until my marriage ended and I started being with safer partners too, that my body was like, oh, that like, okay, this is fine. Actually, this is more than fun. This is great. And yeah, so all that to say, like, when the narrative number one is female pleasure doesn't matter, people don't think about it or try to come up with solutions. And vulvodynia is very common, I guess. So it's basically a neurophysiological condition where you are touched in your intimate region, intimate spaces, and the sensation that the brain says is there is something that is not happening. It's either a lot of pressure, pain, or a variety of kind of more obscure symptoms. And it's totally treatable. Like, I'm not a medical doctor, but I will tell you those pelvic floor PTs are just wizards. And one of my favorite pelvic floor PTs was like, if I could put up on a billboard something that I feel like keeps being mistaken about sex, she's like, especially for people that have a vagina, the vaginal tissue is actually erectile tissue. And so, the vagina can like elongate. I think it almost, and don't quote me on this, but I think it like almost doubles in like length, when it's aroused. And so she's like, it's, foreplay isn't like just a fun game that you play or whatever. It actually is creating some real estate and space between like, the opening of the cervix and the opening of the vagina, or like the vaginal opening. And so then there's more suppleness and subtle, like kind of like how, a non-erect penis is going to struggle a little bit when it comes to intimacy. So, that I just thought was fascinating. She was like, yeah, this is something that so many people are walking around either trying to provide pleasure for someone that has a vagina and they don't know this, or people have vaginas and they don't know that. So that is like an aside. I actually told my pelvic floor PT I would make sure to mention that on some podcast, because she was like, we've got to get the word out. But as she was helping me with this vulvodynia situation and helping me recalibrate what was possible when it came to pleasure, I learned again how important it was to rewrite and to challenge and to change the channels that go on in my mind about something, because I thought I was just going to live with this forever. And I was heartbroken, and I thought that there was something just very wrong with me. And really it was just, there was shame and mismanaged information and, ancestral trauma, and then my own trauma, and all this stuff sort of locked in that area. That's why it's really, really important to have a coach or someone that can help you walk through those stories that are stored there. There's people that can help with the physical part of it, which is more like a PT. And then there's people like me that can help with the embodiment and the energetics and the emotions and the like story behind it, so that when the muscle decides to relax, it can do so feeling like it's now doing its best job for you that way, as opposed to trying to protect you. Does that make sense? I really hope so, because this is so powerful. It's so, so, so powerful. And the other thing that's interesting is like these muscles that you work on in the pelvic bowl also impact like your hips, and they impact your low back, and they impact your glutes, which impact your hamstrings. Like that whole part of the body, when we separate ourselves from it or pretend that our pleasure doesn't matter, don't listen to the sensations and the messages that the body's telling you, because the louder message is female pleasure doesn't matter, and you should resist any of this at all costs. Like, we're missing out on an opportunity to reconnect to our wisdom and our source in our bodies. So I'm so passionate about this, like, because in all honesty, I think that most people just want to feel comfortable in their own skin. And the skin that we're talking about is not just the skin on like your arms and legs. It's like sometimes even the skin that you can't see. And yeah, there's so much that can be done with this. So Google vulvodynia, or you can reach out to me. I will put my information in the show notes, and we can talk about this forever. I really, really love to support people in moving away from those shame conversations and moving into embodied confidence around your sexuality and your desires and your pleasure. Another condition that that can happen is vaginismus, which is involuntary contractions of the muscles around the opening of the vagina. So this is pretty much like you'll usually know that this is happening because penetration, that kind of like the opening portion of it, can be really, really painful. Which then causes you to guard your hips and guard your internal muscles. And it can be really, really difficult when it comes to intimacy and desire and all of that stuff. And so vaginismus is another great thing to work with a physical therapist on, pelvic floor PT, and or also in, an embodiment or energetic coach to be like, okay, what is this sort of panic, fluttering, contracting emotion that your body is trying to get your attention? It's almost like, really tapping you on the shoulder. So yeah, and those are two conditions that I had never heard of before. And I feel like so often with, especially female health, like we don't learn about something until it's gone wrong. Like until it's not operating quite right, we just sort of take it for granted. And then especially when it comes to things about sex, it's almost like admitting that you have any kind of concern about it brings up a whole other host of feelings like, oh no, now I'm broken, or there's shame, or there's embarrassment, or there's, I don't even freaking know who to start talking to. And so I wanted this podcast to be, like an opening conversation for this, because you deserve to feel good in your body, that you're not alone, and that there are multiple layers and ways to provide support for this, these different conditions. Or maybe you don't have vulvodynia or vaginismus, but maybe you are like embarrassed or uncomfortable about the way that you feel desire. Or I was reading this amazing book called Come As You Are. And it talks about sex being break or desire as having brakes and a gas pedal. So there's things that will incite a feeling of the gas pedal. Like maybe it's like for me, I really like music. I like sensations. I like to I like to feel kind of swept up into something. I like to be really creative and playful and like play with different dynamics. Not to get too much into all of that personal stuff, 'cause I don't really know how much you want to know about what I want. But the main thing is, like, do you know what you want? And it's so important to know what are gas pedal experiences and what are brake pedal experiences, because in this book, it talks about things like having a sex drive is sort of a misnomer. It's more of like, how can you learn to have more things that feel like a accelerator as opposed to a brake? And some of this can also be with partners too. It's like maybe your partner is still talking to you the same way that they did like 5 years ago or whatever. And you're like, dude, I've gone through this major transformation. Like I like to be referred to as something different. Or maybe they know that you've gone through something really painful or hard, and so they're delicate with you. And maybe you don't want delicate. Maybe you want desirable, and like you want to feel like empowered because you've gone through some stuff and you've healed some things, and you're ready to play as hard as you've worked for it. Like it's important to know that sometimes even like the kindest thing that a partner might be trying to do, it in their mind, it might be kindness. And for your body, it might show up as like a break. Like maybe you need less distractions. Maybe you need different lighting. Maybe you need different words to be said. Maybe you need music and no sounds. Like, like it's really, really important to know what your brake pedal is. And that way you can learn to trust yourself, and your partner can, trust themselves to be explorative and playful with you as well. And And I think also, if you're someone that has, has ever experienced any kind of, non-consensual touch in that area, there is a lot of emotional stuff that goes into that. And I highly, highly recommend getting with a practitioner that understands the mind-body trauma-informed lens of a way to help you feel some relief from that. Because, man, that can be a whole, basically, other podcast episode in and of itself. I just want you to be able to enjoy intimacy to the fullest, in a way that you are able to say your best yeses, and to move past any of the insecurities that you feel. It's interesting, even as I'm talking about this, like, I'm feeling my own pelvic floor muscles are like sending these little signals, like, hey. And I'm like, okay, like, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my hand kind of on my low abdomen and just say, like, I hear you, and this is safe. We're talking about, I know we're talking about a topic that, like, you feel might be really vulnerable, and you're sharing with me that we're entering vulnerable territory. Be careful, like, double check, make sure. And so then I can reassure my body now that I don't shame her when she talks to me like that. And I just say, okay, cool. Like, thanks for showing up, like, actually right on time in this podcast for me to remember to talk about that. It almost feels like what used to be a sign of like a dysfunction has turned into a great asset for me. That's also why I do a lot of the work that I do, because I feel like oftentimes the things that may have made us feel the most disqualified in life, made us feel like the most misfit. Like, I felt so much shame around, like, that my body just felt like it was broken and I was the problem in my relationship. Like, I don't have any time for that now. And you could have told me till I was blue in the face, it's not your fault. It's not blah, 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 blah. And that's cool. Except my body was like, you're full of shit. Like, yeah, like, yeah, we get to heal these stories for real, because, and why it's so important to change those body channels is because even when my pelvic floor PT would do some work, and y'all, I had like an hour-long regimen of stuff I was doing, and I was like in it to win it. Like, I wanted this to be better, and I'm a good student when it comes to that kind of stuff. But like, because I had not changed the channel around it, it took a different partner and them being like, okay, I know that you're starting to feel some of these fear sensations. Like, how would it feel for you to breathe through this, like, even just 5 more seconds, and see if it gets better or worse? And like, I remember being like, it's going to be awful. It's going to be awful. Oh, okay. Maybe it's not quite as awful. You need a place that's like safe, slightly uncomfortable, for change to happen. Right. And with someone that's like a safe person to practice changing those channels with. Yeah, for me, I'm very grateful that I've had partners that were patient with me and that would and were interested in being on the journey of self-discovery with me, because it made all the difference. And I really think that it's important, if you are rewriting some stories around like your pleasure, your body, intimacy. Maybe you've never heard of vulvodynia before, or vaginismus. Maybe you don't know what your brake or your accelerator things are. Maybe you don't even know how to talk about what you like. Maybe you just learned about that a vaginal canal can expand and you're like, that's so cool. What else don't I know? What else can I learn about myself? Like, I really hope that this podcast is a springboard to move away from like, I will always be this way and shame to curiosity and sharing. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes for connection for us to be able to talk about this. And it's really funny. I've had some friends in the past that were like, they almost nicknamed me like the orgasm fairy godmother, because I just am so here for women to feel liberated in their body's experience of consensual pleasure. That like, you know, we'd have a conversation and they might be with their partner and they're like, oh, I just couldn't wait to tell Megan about how it's like how much better it was. Like, that's so important. It's so, so, so important. And so if you don't have anyone to talk to about this, if you're wanting resources, if you're wanting to rewrite some of these narratives and stories and practice shame resiliency when it comes to sex and pleasure, find me in the show notes. And also I'll drop my Instagram too, so you can follow along there too to learn more embodiment tips and tricks and just ways, again, to change the channel in your body, because baby, you're worth it. You're so worth it. And if you've also come from a religious background or conditioning, or maybe you've come out of a long-term relationship, partnership, marriage, and you have some residual experiences of what that intimacy was like for you, let's work on that together. Let's unravel some of that stuff that has been sort of a learned pattern that maybe you've assigned the idea as its truth. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's true just because you're having a feeling about it. Sometimes feelings are, I think feelings are oftentimes sensations, and what it is it's the value that we assign to them. And so let's rewrite those narratives. Let's help you feel comfortable in your body. Let's change those channels that are keeping you stuck and stagnant when you were meant to soar and to feel pleasure. And let's embrace the 28-day cycle of, hey, look, it's a new day, new me. Who the hell am I? What do I like? What do I want? Let's get curious. Let's learn to talk about our wants and desires. And let's take some of the pressure off of our male partners, or partners that are embodying more of the divine masculine. Like, let's take some pressure off of them to not have to be the quote, just always thinking about this all the time. And what if both of you find a middle ground, start asking questions, being curious? Because if you lead from the lens of following the feminine 28-day cycle, never the same person, then you don't have to assume like, oh, you should just know what I like. Well, why? Like, you don't even know what you're like. You're a new person today. Like, let's be curious. Let's stop like pointing fingers and, insisting that someone read your mind, because I don't know, if you're anything like me, sometimes I'm just trying to get a handle on my own mind one day to the next. So this is important. You are important. Your pleasure is important. Your connection is important. And the channels that you change and you say about yourself and your sexual health is also important. So let's start those conversations. If this was valuable to you, I love feedback. Thank you to those of you that have left, 5-star reviews or comments. Also, DM'd me on Instagram and let me know what the podcast is meaning to you. It's really, really, really supportive for me to know what to talk about and how to support you best, because Change the Channel is meant to be like a conversation starter and conversation piece. We're oftentimes not one and done with this stuff. It's more of, where is there a safe place to grapple? So the more you like and subscribe and comment, all those things allow Change the Channel to get out there in front of more eyes. And you never know, like sharing this podcast with a woman that you care about might be the start of her liberation to finally understand her body in a really profound way. And I, like, speaking as someone that's gone through this journey and, healed from different forms of assault and other things, not to bring up triggering topics at the end of this, but like, there is so much healing. There's so much hope. There's so much joy. There's so much that can come from this, but it really does need to start with a conversation. So share it with your friends. Please like, subscribe, so you know when the next Change the Channel rant and time comes to podcast platforms near you. And thank you again for your 5-star reviews. It literally means the world. All right, y'all. With this hot, steamy topic, this has been another dope episode of Change the Channel podcast.